Amy. Thanks so much for doing this, and a big thank you to Andrea Rosenhaft who made this happen, because she really tried many Barnes and Nobles to get us going, and this is our first, we hope, of others as well, so thank you. So yes, my name is Perry Hoffman, and I started an organization about 16 years ago because the National Alliance on Mental Illness did not take BPD under its mission umbrella. It didn't have time to see it as a priority population. So several of us got together actually 3 weeks before 9/11. We met over at New York Hospital at my office, and we said we needed to do something for this disorder, because unlike other disorders that are under the NAMI umbrella, there was no advocacy being done on behalf of this disorder. So we started this organization. We decided the first thing to do, you have to organize yourself around something. So we decided to do a conference. And we were very fortunate that we called Dr. John Gunderson, who actually is the co-editor on this book, and we said, would you do a conference with us? And he said, yes. And so we thought, oh my goodness, maybe we're going to get on the mark with this. So then we called Dr. Marcia Linehan. We said, Dr. Gunderson's going to do a conference with us. Would you do a conference with us? She said, yes. We thought, we're really moving along here. And then we called Dr. Kernberg, who some of you might know really was the one who initially put the disorder on the map. And he said also that he would also do the conference with us. So the next year at Columbia University, we had over 450 people for a 2-day conference. And that was sort of the beginning of our organization. And the reason that our organization has been able to move forward is because it's driven by the passion of families. We're a family organization. We're not-for-profit. We're all volunteer. Nobody gets a salary. It really comes from the heart, all the work that we want to do. And we've been very fortunate to also be able to design a family program called Family Connections. This is a 12-week program, research-based, that's now in 20 countries. We actually run it on Sundays at New York Hospital on Sunday mornings. It's done by Ann and Matt Costello. They've been doing it for 7 years. I think they've had probably 30 groups, and they keep doing it. We have a flyer in case you're interested. So that's a little background on who we are. And once we started our organization and started to make some connections, we then decided, you know what, we're not giving up on NAMI. We're going to keep trying to see if NAMI would recognize this as one of their priority populations. And so we went down there, we spoke to some people, and then they decided, you know what, maybe we need to take a second look at this. And they sponsored a 2-day BPD experts group. And we had most of the major researchers and names there, Dr. Gunderson, Marcia Linehan, John Oldham, who then went on to run Mayor Clinic. There were about 15 of us there. And after that 2 days and orienting NAMI to who we are and why we're doing what we're doing, they decided to make it a priority population. So that was in 2006, and ever since then we've always done a symposium at the NAMI National Conference. We helped rewrite their website on BPD. So NAMI has been now one of our best supporters, and we're so grateful that we're able to work together and move this disorder forward. This is a disorder of a lot of stigma, and I'd just like to read to you a few lines of the introduction, because it'll give you the sense of how the disorder is seen, and then I'll say a little more about it. Seldom does an illness, medical or psychiatric, carry such intense stigma and deep shame that its name is whispered or a euphemism coined, and its sufferers despised and even feared. Perhaps leprosy or syphilis or AIDS fits this category. Borderline personality disorder is such an illness. In fact, it's been called the leprosy of mental illnesses and the disorder with surplus stigma. It may actually be the most misunderstood psychiatric disorder of our age. And anybody who's had any interface with either somebody who has the disorder, or if you have the disorder, you know that every word of this is true. This is a disorder that is rampant with discrimination, and it really unfortunately started with professionals who still keep that stigma going, but each year we try to chip away a little more at that. What happened was then, over the years, I would get phone calls, and still do every week, and someone will say, I've just been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, or my loved one has, and I'm devastated. I go on the internet and I read all these awful things about the disorder. It says it's hopeless, it's a chronic illness, people never get better. Actually, one person told me, a psychiatrist said whispered to the father, your daughter has borderline, there's no hope. So with this in mind, and then also knowing that there are many stories of recovery, that what we decided, Dr. Gunderson and I decided to do, was to put this book together. So this is a story of recoveries from 24 people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And the book really gives hope to people. When I also work privately, so when I see people, I bought a whole bunch of these books and I give it out as soon as someone tells me they have the disorder. Somebody came to me the other day and she said, I've been told I have borderline personality disorder. She said, I was told it takes 5 years for somebody to get better and that probably I won't get better. And I said, you know what? You went to see the wrong person. Because with the new evidence-based treatments that are out there, and there are really 4 that are most prominent, I said people get better. And in fact, this is one of the few psychiatric diagnoses that's not lifelong. People with schizophrenia, and thank goodness with medication, they can control their symptoms, but it's a lifelong disorder. Bipolar disorder is a lifelong disorder. Depression, on some level, is also a lifelong disorder, as are many others. Borderline personality disorder is not a life sentence. It's actually the voice of hope in the psychiatric community. So that's the message that we have been giving out. We hope people will see for themselves through the evidence-based treatments. And let me just quickly go through which ones there are. So there's dialectical behavior therapy, which is DBT, and that started probably in the late 80s, and the landmark article came out in 1993, and that revolutionized borderline personality disorder in people's lives. Marsha Linehan, who's the creator of DBT, said don't hospitalize patients. She called all the hospitals in her area and she said, don't put them in the hospital. That's not going to help them get better. We need to teach them skills. And then, of course, with managed care, who was delighted to hear that. That's also been behind the impetus of not hospitalizing patients for a long time, which is a good thing. So there's DBT. There are 25 studies out there that show its effectiveness. There's transference-focused therapy that was started by Dr. Otto Kernberg and his team up at New York Hospital that also has, I think, 2 studies now to show its efficacy. There's mentalization, which was started in London by Peter Fonagy and Anthony Bateman. That has a number of studies out there. And the last one, and probably the one we should be watching the most right now, is called General Psychiatric Management. This was started by Dr. John Gunderson and his colleagues, and it's a much less intense treatment to learn for therapists, so there's much more opportunity to get it out there across the country. It's simple, it's brief, it's very basic about learning cognitive behavioral approaches and some psychodynamic interventions, but it's very effective. So those are the 4 treatments that are out there. I will take questions afterwards. What I'd like to do now is just read you one more clip. This is from Brandon Marshall, who's the football player who came out. He was actually the first and probably the only celebrity that has said that they have borderline personality disorder, which is unfortunate because there are a lot of people out there. I hear about and we all do hear about all these movie stars, and they go to addiction programs, and I think many of us in the field will say, what are they really looking at, and what should really be treated? So with that being said, we are very grateful to Brandon Marshall, who at least put it on the map in that sense, and he wrote the foreword for the book. For 5 years, my life was a living hell. I had no clue what was going on. I spent years talking to doctors, sometimes 3 or 4 in 1 week. It wasn't until I received the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder that I was able to grasp hold of my life. People only saw what was unfolding on ESPN. The drug arrests, the domestic disputes, that was the story the public was absorbing. What they didn't see, couldn't possibly know, were the days I sat in a dark room, the days that went on by when I didn't utter a single word, and the persistent game of dramatic emotional changes that was going on inside me. So we appreciate what Brandon Marshall has done, and we also appreciate the 24 authors who really put their heart into making this book possible. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Andrea Rosenhaft, who is very eager to share her story with you, and then answer any questions that you might have. Andrea?
Thank you, Perry. It's great to be here. Thank you to Amy for working with me to organize this event and help, fight the stigma of borderline personality disorder and mental illness in general. So this piece that I wrote for the anthology, my piece is called Letting in the Light, Letting the Light In. I'm sorry. Letting the Light In only captures really a snippet of my journey fighting my struggle with mental illness, which has lasted 56, which has lasted just about all my adult life. I was first diagnosed, borderline personality disorder, people that are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder often carry comorbid or other diagnosis, other mental illness diagnosis, and I was also diagnosed with anorexia and major depressive disorder, all around the same time in my late 20s, early 30s. So it was quite a struggle, and it took me till now. So we're talking about, I first entered therapy when I was 23, so we're talking like about 30 years of therapy and hospitalizations and partial hospitalization programs and individual therapy and a lot of stuff going on. And I don't want to discourage anybody, but when I was diagnosed, again, as Perry said, the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder carried an incredible stigma, a very poor prognosis, and my parents were told she'll never get better, and I was told I'll never get better, and you might as well give up hope. But I was fortunate enough to encounter some incredible clinicians who wanted to work with people who were diagnosed with this disorder, who have devoted their lives to people that have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and were incredibly gracious, incredibly kind, and incredibly supportive. And Dr. Hoffman is one of them, and I've known her for a long time. And they did not give up on us, they fought for us, and they have supported us throughout our journeys. And very appreciative of all these clinicians that I've encountered. So, as I'll read my piece, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about any part of my journey, and Dr. Hoffman will also, as she said, answer questions. So, as I said, the piece is called Letting the Light In. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder in 1990 when I was 29 years old, following a suicide attempt. The overdose wasn't my first attempt at taking my life. Several years prior, I had tried to cut my wrists, but was unable to go deep enough. I didn't tell anyone what I had done. Through this act, I discovered the ritual of cutting, which calmed the emotional ups and downs that were plaguing me, as well as the emptiness that had invaded my soul. I've been in different forms of psychotherapy since I was 23, and after receiving the diagnosis of BPD, I wanted to know why. What had caused me to develop this illness that back then carried such a negative connotation in the psychiatric community? I wanted someone or something to blame. I wanted a reason to shove it in a box, tie it up with a pretty bow, and place it high up on a shelf in the closet. I wanted the BPD out of sight and out of mind. Life didn't work that way. A picture of a broken animal, its still body lying contorted by the side of the highway, came to mind as I endured repeated hospitalization and frequent episodes of depression and anorexia. Chaos reigned. I wasn't actively suicidal, but when I went to bed each night, I begged to a power greater than myself not to wake up. After my first 2 hospitalizations for anorexia, the loss of a promising career in marketing and the suicide attempt, I went on the rolls of Social Security disability. I was a patient for almost a year on a long-term dialectical behavioral therapy hospital unit that specialized in treating BPD until my insurance ran out. And then I lived in a halfway house for 3.5 years. Part of the time I was staying in the residence, I was attending an outpatient DBT program for people with BPD. In 1995, I left the residence and moved into my own apartment. 3 years later, while continuing with the intensive therapy I had started on the long-term unit, I entered a graduate school program for social work. I was going to become a therapist. Being in therapy for so long had sparked a fascination with the process, and I wanted to help others, as my therapist said helped me. In 2000, I graduated with a perfect 4.0 GPA and found my first job as an outpatient mental health at an outpatient mental health clinic near my home in Westchester, New York. They knew nothing of my history. My supervisor was a kind man, and I did well there until 2005, when the unrelenting depression returned and I needed to be hospitalized. I had known I had felt off, but I didn't want to believe that my mental illness could interrupt my life again. There was no doubt that I had to be admitted there were suicidal thoughts involved. I hadn't been this depressed in a long time. My mother had passed away in 2002. Perhaps it was a long delayed reaction to her death, or maybe it was just time for me to fall apart. I returned to work after a month, but nothing had changed. Another hospitalization followed several months later at the beginning of 2006. This time when I returned to work, I found that my clinical responsibilities had been severely curtailed, humiliated. I resigned. The internal chaos had assaulted my core once again. Without my job, which had defined me since my mother's death, I felt increasingly empty. The tidal wave of emotions brought the beginning of a complete breakdown, which required 6 hospitalizations in all, and several years to return to my former level of functioning. In 2007, when I was still on this roller coaster ride, I enrolled in a writing class at a local center. I enjoyed the feeling of creating something from nothing, of crafting a sentence, a paragraph, and a finished essay. I continued to take classes for 2 years and published several pieces. I didn't feel comfortable calling myself a writer, but I enjoyed the elation that came from seeing my name in print. The writer identity began to snake its way into my psyche and slowly replaced the patient identity. I had found something else that I was good at, and that was validated by others, by my instructor, by my classmates, and by seeing my name in print in the pages of an anthology. I had started with a new therapist who was also a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. She specialized in transference-focused psychotherapy, which is a psychodynamic treatment for BPD that focuses on the transference between the therapist and the client and the insights gained. The therapist highlights the behavior that have become apparent in the therapeutic relationship and how they influence the client's relationships in her life outside the therapeutic office. The therapy called for sessions twice a week. Dr. L encouraged me to free associate, but that was difficult for me. I was used to censoring what I said, which went back to a fear of criticism from my father. He used to tell me to think, especially during our chess games, as my hand was poised over the board holding a rook or a pawn. He purposely mangled the word think, so it stuck in my mind, and I rarely answered a question without hearing his harsh voice reverberating in my brain. For many years, I used the think excuse, which seemed plausible until Dr. L confronted me. I don't think you're thinking as much as you claim to be when I ask you a question, she says in a calm voice. Disbelieving, I looked at her. It goes back to the chess games you played with your father, but more of your fear of angering him and your fear of rejection from him and from me. Slowly, I nodded. I was terrified of what he might say to me if I dared to say the wrong thing. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk that he might think I was stupid. If he thought I was stupid, he wouldn't love me. I wouldn't be his daughter anymore. He'd abandon me. Go on, Dr. L urged. Just like if I said the wrong thing to you, you'd reject me and abandon me. And you wouldn't be my daughter anymore. I burst into tears. Dr. L encouraged me to return my career as a social worker on a part-time basis at first. I found a fee-for-service job at an outpatient mental health clinic in Queens, not far from where I'd grown up. It was a long drive from my home in Westchester, but they were willing to take a chance on me. After 9 months of working part-time, I was hired on a full-time basis. Soon after that, the executive director of the agency tapped me to start working on some administrative projects for her. She had noticed my penchant for perfectionism and my talent for detail-oriented work, and she put it to use. Slowly, I stopped taking on clients and began taking on more administrative work. I enjoyed the feeling that I was contributing to the running of the clinic in a more global way. It felt as though I finally found my niche. Dr. L was pleased that I had come so far, but she had additional ideas about what fueled my tendency to enjoy the specific type of work. I think it makes you feel superior, just like the anorexia did, she told me. I admit that I was in the midst of the anorexia. I got a kick out of feeling that I was better than other people because I could resist eating and I could drop 30 pounds at will. But what does that have to do with this? I asked. You're reviewing the work of other therapists. You're correcting their work and picking up issues that they potentially overlooked. Yeah, so I was defensive. I think you get a kick out of that. You feel you know what you're doing while they know less than you. It's a similar situation to when you were actively anorexic. I crossed my arms over my chest and slumped down in my chair. And what if I consider that you might be right? I learned that Dr. L was intelligent and rarely off the mark. A tall woman with short curly hair, she sat impeccably dressed in a comfortable black leather chair with her feet up on a matching ottoman. I sat facing her in a hardback, rather uncomfortable chair. At times, I wonder if she purposely chose that chair to keep her clients alert. In the years I worked with Dr. L, my life began to ease into a predictable rhythm. I was doing well, functioning at a higher level than anyone would have thought possible. I was advancing at my job, I was writing and publishing. While not dating, I had a full and active social life with a small but close circle of friends and family. And I was able to reduce my sessions with Dr. L to once a week. We talked about my lack of interest or desire to date. You know, she said to me during one session, you deny yourself two of the greatest pleasures of life, food and sex. What is that about? I'm afraid, I replied, of becoming dependent on a man, of making myself vulnerable to him. I don't think I'm capable of an intimate relationship, I paused. I'm afraid of consuming him and him consuming me. That sounds an awful lot like food, Dr. L remarked. In 2012, my father was starting to make noise from his apartment in Queens. His health was declining and he needed my brother and my assistance. My work was close by, so several nights a week, I did his food shopping for him. His apartment was in a state of squalor. I couldn't believe that I had grown up there, playing on my hands and knees on the white tile floors that were now black with grime and littered with dead roaches. My brother convinced our father to move up to a studio apartment in Connecticut, closer to him. Dad's health declined quickly up there, and one afternoon in 2013, I took him to the hospital. He never left. He had sepsis and his liver was failing. Transferred to a palliative care facility, he died within 10 days. My brother and I tossed his ashes in the Long Island Sound on a brisk spring afternoon. The depression took root 6 months after my father's death, as snow and ice covered the ground and life died from the bitter chill. I'd been well for so long, I believed that I was safe. Day after day at work, I shut the door to my office and sobbed. Dr. L admitted me to a partial hospitalization program to change my medication. I returned to work for a week and felt overwhelmed. Before the sun rose on a Saturday morning, I padded into my kitchen and swallowed a bottle of pills. Wading back into my bedroom, I fell down onto my bed and waited to die. I took a cab to the emergency room and wound up on the cardiac floor, attached to a heart monitor. I was transferred to a psychiatric hospital. Dr. L had mandated that I be admitted to the personality disorders unit. My BBC symptoms, the one I thought I was managing so well, had erupted into a torrent, as though an aorta had torn with blood everywhere. I had fired Dr. L several months back in a burst of anger, and although we had seemingly worked it out, I hadn't realized how very angry I still was with her. The internal emptiness, the pain, the night prior to the overdose, I had lain on my living room floor, hand outstretched toward my cat, howling as though I were a wounded animal, my snot dripping into the carpet. For the first time in the 9+ years that I had been working with Dr. L, I began to talk about my anger towards her, towards the people I loved, towards the world in general. She didn't judge me, reject me, or abandon me. I told her I was a terrible person, hateful, and I should be condemned for having such thought. She didn't laugh or even smile. She took me seriously, and I felt validated. I hadn't written since December of 2003, and I was mourning the loss of my creativity. I was mourning the loss of the identity that had once rescued me from being a patient. Now I was ill once again, and my only way out was to talk about it. I worked hard at saying the first thing that came to mind, without censoring, without judging myself. Sessions passed, weeks, months. I asked my boss if I could return to work full-time in August. Prior to that, I had been at my job only part-time. Feeling inspired once more, I began to post my blog weekly. It felt freeing to be writing again. I visualized the morning mist, rising off the ocean, curling up to meet the clouds. My black and white thinking faded to gray. I was able to envision both sides of a concept more easily, to see a compromise, where before there had been only absolutes. I realized how deeply my father must have been hurt when the psychiatrist on the long-term BPT unit accused him of sexually abusing me as a child. I realized that his fragile ego most likely never recovered, and in response, he chose to retreat. Daddy, I'm sorry. Too late. He could no longer hear me. The hatred I once felt for him was dwarfed by shame. I recently turned 54, and my core sentiment is one of gratitude. I look back over the last 25 years, and I am thankful for the people in my life who stayed with me when I was determined to destroy myself. I thought I was thriving when I was treading water. I thought there could be no more surprises when there were countless bombshells waiting to be unearthed. Dr. L commented that this last year has been the most intense. I've done a great deal of work. I still have work to do. I will always have work to do, to preserve equilibrium, to maintain balance, to let the light in. What is different now is I like the person I have become. I respect her. When I recall the level of pain the woman on the carpet was in a year ago, the memory brings tears to my eyes. I am content now, and I pray that every day I will never be face down on that carpet again. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And I also know that there's some people in the audience who've been on that recovery road with you, so thanks to them too for being here. So I've never heard it read, so to hear someone read their story adds another depth to all of this. Thank you. So now we're open to questions. Yes.
I was wondering if this disorder is sometimes diagnosed from a third party, like is it possible when a person is in denial but their significant other is seeing these signs, and so my therapist was telling me this person has BBT. How common is that?
Well, I think it oftentimes we get spouses coming in and saying, I think that my wife or my husband has borderline personality disorder. We certainly can't diagnose somebody without seeing them, but there's certain symptoms and hallmarks of the disorder that you can think, well, this might be a trait of BPD. I also want to say that it's not important that somebody get the housekeeping seal of approval, this is borderline, because out of the 9 symptoms, if you have one, your life can be hell. So although I think it's important to get a diagnosis so you know that what you're treating, it is hard to diagnose someone until you've met them. And go with the symptoms and what kind of life that person lives and what kind of life the person that they live with lives. Let me also say that borderline personality disorder is a disorder of relationships. All of the symptoms occur in relationships, meaning that if somebody were to live on an island, they wouldn't look borderline because there's nobody to interface with those symptoms. So sometimes the disorder will show itself in just 1 or 2 relationships, or sometimes it can be across the board. It's really varied. But if you think that the person you're referring to has BPD, then I just urge you to get them to see somebody to do an assessment. And I know that's hard. I must say 25% of people who come to me say, how can I get my loved one into treatment? And as Marsha Linehan said, you can't get anyone into treatment. You can just hope in time that they will. Yes.
So Marshall Linehan's work is about skill building. What you described so poignantly, so touchingly, is about really a personal transformation that is looking at the past and looking at the psychodynamic, psychoanalytic elements
Right.
that go well beyond skill building. As useful as skill building is this the approach you feel worked best for you, and in treatment also too?
Well, I had many years of DBT, so let me just say something that the transference-focused psychotherapy was very difficult to go through, and I was in that therapy for 11 years. But if I hadn't had the skills that I learned in DBT, of being able to manage emotional regulation and emotional crisis, that I wouldn't able to have be able to manage what going through the TFP, because it brought up so many difficult feelings to tolerate. Like when I walked out of the TFP sessions after 45 minutes, the feelings that were brought up in the sessions didn't just disappear. I had to tolerate them, and until the next session. So you have to be, at a certain point where you can manage those, the feelings from TFP. So, yes, I would say in combination, in succession, they both work for me at certain points in my illness. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't believe I'm going to say this, disclosure, I guess, but it's funny, when I was reading this book, I felt like you were writing for my soul. As a matter of fact, I was looking at the time frame, and ironically, I think this one actually touched me the most. I think when you were talking about the fifth thing, I was just kind of like, oh my God, because I just identified with it so much, and I just think you're so brave to be able to, to say this. And it was one of the chapters that really, touched me, because when I was little, I was 7, and my dad was trying to get me to understand something, and he says, "What's the matter with you? Are you stupid?" And that so anytime something comes up. So I want to say thank you to because I felt like you were really writing. So I actually have it highlighted. The line of stuff that you said about it. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
I wonder if I can also add that this young woman is now a DBT skills teacher, right?
Yeah, I'm running group. It's actually called Relationship Tools Covered.
Right.
We have some people who didn't hear, but can you come up to the mic and just repeat what you just said?
We're videotaping this. Do you want to be on videotape? I'll bring you the mic, and you can just talk and we won't video it. Or you don't have to do it at all.
No, I'll do it.
Oh, okay. So we just repeat the whole story.
Do you want me to bring you the mic?
Yeah, I guess so.
We won't videotape it. You know what, come sit here. Great, thank you. Just say what you want to say on the microphone, great.
When you were writing, when I was reading your chapter, I didn't know who you were, but I kept comparing myself, not comparing, but I could really identify it. Your chapter, I felt like you were reading from my soul. Definitely the part about, definitely the part about when you said that you're, what did I say? Because when I was little, my dad said to me, and I was very little, and he said, trying to get me to work out math, and he said, "What's the matter with you?" Like, I couldn't in seconds think about something, and he said, "What's the matter with you? Are you stupid?" And to this day, anytime I can't accomplish something, even when it has to do with math, I think, oh my God, I'm stupid. So your chapter really touched me. There were lots of parts of it that I could really identify with. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes.
Yes.
I understand you can't make somebody go and get help, but do you have any ideas for ways you can be persuasive to encourage them to go and get help?
Well, what I try to encourage family members to do is to identify the suffering that the person's going through. So we're not talking about diagnosis, we're talking about somebody in pain, and what can we do, what can they do to help with the pain. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. It's really very arbitrary, and sometimes it takes people several tries to go for therapy. It's not a good match, so they don't stay. So I wish we had a magic formula, because that would make such a difference. But the take-home message I hope you all hear is that this is a disorder of hope, okay? So if people have this disorder, they can get better, and hopefully in getting into treatment will happen eventually.
It's really about finding the right person to be in therapy with. The therapeutic alliance is really important, and the person that has this disorder has to feel, I think the most important thing is trust, and the other thing is to feel not judged, because people with borderline personality disorder, often feel judged at every turn. So you have to be able to feel with the therapist is that you can say anything, and that the therapist is not going to, laugh, smile, crack a joke, do anything that's going to make you feel that, basically that, they're thinking, that, because we're, I was called when I was young, very sensitive, and I would cry basically at the drop of a hat. And one thing writing did is make me develop a thick skin, so in that way it was good for me. But that label has, I've carried that label with me. So, so the thing about a therapist, not judging you is very important. And if you cry, you cry. If you, talk about anything, then the therapist, the therapist also has to be able to handle, anything that the patient throws at them. As I said, I fired my therapist twice, and, she came back and we talked about it. She didn't accept it and say, okay, we're done. Because she knows that's part of the disorder, the anger. The anger is a very big part of the disorder. So, you have to really find someone that has experience. Experience is a big part. You just can't find someone, that lists 20 things on their resume and says BPT is one of them. You really have to look for someone that's experienced and well-versed in borderline personality disorder. Yeah.
Sorry. When you're feeling that intense and you're catastrophizing.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
When you're feeling that intense and you're catastrophizing, whether it's in your apartment or at work, I have the fight or flight thing. I just want to leave and then run at work. I want to go to my mom's, I'm regressing. What coping skills? I know I've been through DBT, I have a therapist now, and I'm out of the system, but considering going back into it. What worked for you? I know everybody's different.
My biggest coping skill right now is writing. I write about everything. If I don't want to publish something, then, I'll write about it anyway. I'll just choose not to publish it. But, that's basically what writing has an intense power to heal. And I won't just endorse writing, I'll talk about anything that, is creative, painting, sculpture, music, and for some reason, I think the creative arts has an incredible power to help somebody heal. And, I'm just saying what worked for me. But everyone obviously has to find what works for them. But for some reason, I'm a very big proponent of someone, trying creativity, and finding what works for them. Anybody else? Yes.
I have a question for the doctor. Is that Now's the right time.
Sure.
How do you compare this with other personality disorders and on the spectrum?
Compared in what way?
Well, like I have heard that borderline is kind of on a spectrum from narcissistic personality disorder to borderline to sociopath, and those are like the categories of, those are the main ones that I know of that are personality disorders. So I mean, like what, like can you describe the differences between the three?
Well, so there are 10 personality disorders. Borderline is the one that's the most researched, the one that has the best treatments out there. And let me also say, because you're reminding me of something I wanted to say before, borderline rarely stands alone. I don't think I've ever met a patient with borderline who doesn't have another co-occurring disorder, whether it be depression, and I think we're almost up to 80%, or dysthymia, which is a kind of depression that people with BPD have, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, substance abuse. So it's not a disorder that stands on its own. And probably some people with the disorder also have some other personality disorders. In terms of a continuum, actually now the way the diagnoses are going is that everything is on a continuum now. So there's so much overlap that it's really, for some people, it's hard to say which is one diagnosis versus another. So if you think of them all on a continuum, I can't put them in a row on that continuum, but that they all have some things that go together. And there's some people who have BPD and have narcissism or obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So it's a hard question, but an interesting one to think about if we were to put it on a continuum. And I don't know if anybody has, but I'll look into it. What we have now is something called RDoC, and this is what's being used now, and I think it's good. We'll see it more down the road in terms of research, because what it's looking at is clusters of symptoms and not necessarily putting them into diagnostic categories, but more where they fit together as a unit. And that's much more where things are going rather than a diagnostic category for research. That being said, there's also a lot of pushback from the researchers because we've been very clear on borderline personality disorder or other disorders that somebody fits this criteria. It's easy to research when you know who your subjects are. But in terms of a continuum, it's a great question that we need to have a better answer than I'm supplying now. Yeah.
So then, is there a difference between character disorder and personality disorder?
Well, I've never heard of character disorder as a diagnosis.
Well, I mean, but that's an umbrella term, character disorders, for like BPD and narcissistic personality and
Right, each of those are personality disorders.
So that's the same as character disorder?
Well, I don't know the term. We have a psychiatrist here, maybe she wants to fill in.
I'd like to feel this, I trained at Cornell, and when I was a fourth-year resident, I was already learning
Judith?
I was already learning transference focus therapy, and then I also wanted to learn DBT, so I did some of that, and I literally felt like I have my brain two separate places, like, because both make sense, but they are all different. But to answer your question, in that sense, I think Otto Kernberg's scheme is the most helpful, in which you look at personality organization, and many different personality disorders and clusters fit in particular organization. The old term was character disorder. I think, I don't know what sounds worse for a human being to be told personality disorder. Characters, neither one of them sound nice, but there's a lot of overlap, and it has to do with the patient's defenses, which is why people are suffering so much, because they don't have good psychological defenses. We all go through life. If you don't have healthy defenses, we would crumble. And these people don't have good defensive structures. The reality testing can be bad, and they don't have a good sense of who they are, which is called identity diffusion. So which is why these people often go through life and they don't find, what do I want to do? One day I want to do this, next day that. It's very chaotic and hard. Same with relationships, as Barry said, that's really this really disorder of relationships. So that, I think, although it may sound confusing, but I think we don't really, research is different and insurance company coding is different, but the understanding of the whole complex of the personality is yet another thing. But it's really, truly, I really concur that it's really a disorder that can really improve the behavior. And then the other thing is that it's terrible what happens with the insurance companies. I mean, they don't, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but there is no parity at all, or very little parity. So the stigma, but also the idea that these people cost so much money, they don't cost much money. They need to have proper treatment, and it's going to reduce hospitalization, other physical ailments. These are talented, intelligent people who can function, work, become, taxpayers of the society, unless they become very wealthy, in which case they might want to do business. But anyway.
I also invite you to go to our website. We have the largest media library in the world on borderline personality disorder. And you can hear Frank Yeomans, who's transference-focused therapy. You can hear Marsha Linehan. You can hear Otto Kernberg. I mean, anybody who's contributed to the field is on our website. And our website's an easy one to remember. It's borderlinepersonalitydisorder.com. And just go on there. As I said at one conference, you can binge watch because it's hundreds of hours on the disorder. And maybe you'll find something in there that even further answers your question. Other questions? Yes.
Is this disorder environmentally influenced, or is it a brain chemistry issue?
So that's there are different views on this. When Marsha Linehan first came out with DBT, she gave the idea that there's a biosocial theory with the disorder. So people are genetically loaded to be emotionally vulnerable. And then there are things in the environment that can that don't meet the needs of that child. Now, the most severe is sexual abuse, but let me also be very clear with you that although the early literature said that people with BPD have been sexually abused, that's not accurate. First of all, there are a lot of people out there who have been sexually abused and do not have any psychiatric diagnoses. But really, it's the problem with the emotional vulnerability and then the environment not knowing how to interact successfully. I often think of an ADHD child, and with hyperactivity, and I mean, the mom just doesn't know what to do. So she loves the child, she does her best, but it's not a good fit. And that's what this is, that it's not a good fit. The term I like to use, rather than invalidating environment, which is really a DBT term, is incompatible environment. And for whatever reason, the environment just wasn't able to meet the needs of the child. That can also happen as the person's growing up, and that environment is not just at home, okay? In school, where kids are getting bullied, or in houses of worship, we see things that are happening. I mean, just all over, child grows up in many environments, and many of those environments can be incompatible to that young child, or teenager, or in adulthood. Also, I want to also emphasize, and of course all of us are not youngsters, but we also need to diagnose this illness under 18. It's a myth that you can't have BPD until you're 18. And as somebody said, so on your 18th birthday, good news, you have borderline personality disorder. We see this diagnosis even in childhood. And actually, Otto Kernberg's wife, Paulina Kernberg, who passed away about 10 years ago, she did extensive writing on, in childhood, you see seeds of borderline personality disorder. And if we can get in early with our youth, we will turn the tide on this disorder as well. They don't have to have the full diagnosis. Sometimes it looks a little confusing with adolescents. But the fact is that if we can start teaching them skills, which actually is happening in schools, that we can turn the tide, that this disorder doesn't even have to develop. So I say an early identification equals the best prevention.
Thank you.
Amy.
What are the seeds in the adolescence era of your life that would tell you who would be signs of borderline personality? Is it specific to those teen years and then it escalates as you get older if it's not diagnosed?
I just took the plug out.
Oh. Got it.
Oh, yeah, you did it. But it's probably has to release. That's okay.
Yeah, it does, sorry.
Great, thank you. So what we see in childhood and adolescence, we see problems in relationships. We see mood instability. Now you can also say, well, gosh, this happens to children and it happens to adolescents, but we're talking about extremes here. Cutting also in some communities is a fad, so you want to make sure it's not just a fad, but it actually is an indication of a disorder. What else do we say? What other things are, the child withdrawing, not really being responsive to interactions, suicide attempts. I hate to use the word threats of suicide because it sounds as though it's not real, but suicidal thinking and behaviors that make you worried about a child. Those are some of the constellations of what you'll see. And again, it looks like, adolescence. Also want to put in a note of caution here is that bipolar disorder in youth is just, whoa. I mean, the numbers have gone up incredibly. Now, I've understood in the last year or 2 or 3, there's a new diagnosis that's sort of siphoning some of that off. But a lot of bipolar kids might also have borderline personality disorder or might just have borderline personality disorder. There's a study that was done up at Brown University that found that up to 40% of adults diagnosed with bipolar disorder actually had borderline personality disorder. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but the unfortunate part is it means that people are getting medicated for something that they don't have. And also people have both diagnoses. I think it's 15% of people with BPD also have bipolar disorder. So there's a lot of confusion, but with a good assessment, you can tease it out and then get into the right treatment. Also want to push the idea of family involvement. I knew Andrea's mom, and that was some lady who just stood the course, and we know that's what family members have to do. We did a study called Unexpressed Emotion that showed that the more involved a family member is, the better the person with the diagnosis does. So getting families involved is crucial. Families are allies, not villains, as they were once thought so many years ago. So again, I encourage you to go on our website and look at the family program we have for free.
Okay, and as far as my childhood, it was, my father I was not sexually abused, although, on the long-term unit I was on, I think there was a lot of the women were sexually abused, and I kind of just started having flashbacks because I think I kind of just imbued the atmosphere. We would just hang out and talk, and people were very graphic and very open, and like I said in my essay, I wanted an explanation. I wanted everything very tied up, and I just, everything was very ambiguous, and I just, I wanted a reason. It was very, I just wanted to know what happened to me. So in my therapist's office, all of a sudden one day I started having flashbacks, and it wasn't a conscious, it was my unconscious mind just making these scenarios up. But I started smoking pot at 14. I was very athletic. I had questions about my sexuality, and I felt like I had no one to talk to. My mom had to go to work. My mom went to work to support our family. So I would smoke pot on our school grounds every day after school, and I went off to college, and I continued to play ball and smoke every day in our dorms. And after I graduated school, I started working in advertising as a secretary. And when I got the job as a secretary, I just felt so ashamed, and I felt like I had failed. Because here I was with this, newly minted college degree, and the only work, it was a major in communications. And I felt like I'd failed my parents, and I felt like I had failed, myself, because, the only job I could get was a secretary in an advertising agency. And, but I did join the New York Advertising Co-ed Softball League, and which was amazing. I had a great time. We were playing ball. I was like a star because I had been playing since I was 10. And after work, we would go hang out at this bar on the Upper East Side, and through that league, I was introduced to 2 more leagues. I was a pitcher, so I was pitching fast pitch on the men's team, and I was very aware that, like all these people in Central Park would stop and watch me, but in the back of my mind what were they thinking about me? Were they thinking that I was, was I straight? Was I gay? And then I was pitching, playing on this other women's team, and it was at, in these leagues, I was introduced to cocaine, which I absolutely loved. And I got addicted to cocaine. And then at the same time, a friend of mine, suggested that I go into therapy. Because I was also aware that in this co-ed league, all these people were pairing off. And I didn't know how to flirt, and I didn't know how to be around men. And so I went to therapy with this therapist on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It was kind of the requisite situation. She went, to, I don't know if you ever read Judith Rosner's book, August. But she went to the Hamptons in August, and I would freak out because I got very attached to her, because of this, fear of abandonment, but nobody had ever diagnosed me. And she sent me to a psychiatrist for medication after 2 years. And for some reason, he gave me something that was actually not an antidepressant, but speed. And I lost something like over 40 pounds in 6 months. And she watched me. She just watched me, shrink into a skeleton and emaciated, and she did not say a word. And you talk about a professional, doing that, and I know you don't like the word invalidating environment, but I'm watching myself. My mother's watching this, and she's wondering what the hell is going on. So one day, my mother just threw me into the car and took me to an eating disorder unit. And I lost my job, and I had moved very high up in a very well-known international packaged goods corporation to a consumer management developer, manager, and I was very proud of that. And I lost that job because I spent 6 months on an eating disorder unit. This was before managed care, and that's when I got very, very depressed, and made the suicide attempt that got me hospitalized and diagnosed with BPT. So it's this series of events. It wasn't one thing, but it was something that I was probably predisposed to biologically. But it was a series of events over many years that came to to the diagnosis.
So Andrea, when you got the job as a secretary and you had this great degree and you were so excited, because I did the same thing when I got my degree and I got a temp job and I was just like on top of the world, like, yay, I got any job, like, and you felt you had failed and you were beating yourself up. At what point did you realize that wasn't rational?
I didn't. I worked my rear end off for 1.5 years. I was lucky. I was very fortunate enough to be working for one of the vice presidents of the agency, and he recognized, that I was smart and very good at my job, because we were working on God's electric IBM typewriters, if anybody remembers what those are. So if I caught a typo, I would retype, the whole letter. And at one point, he said they were starting a new department, and he said to the head of that department, if you want an assistant, take Andrea. And she told me later, are you sure about her? And he said, I'm sure. And she actually became my supervisor at 3 different companies. And she told me later at one company, I went first, and then the person who was my boss quit, and the person that hired her said, I want the person that trained Andrea.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got a lot of validation, even though you felt like a failure.
Later.
Right.
Because I was a perfectionist.
Okay.
And anorexics are known to be perfectionists.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It's the battlefield of the mind.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions?
Amy, do you want to close it out then? Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your wonderful questions.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, you guys were wonderful. So if you would like to purchase the book, Beyond Borderline, it's right at our music counter. We're going to have Dr. Hoffman and Andrea stick around if you'd like your book signed, or just come up and visit. They'll be here for a little while longer. Thanks very much.
Thank you.